In one afternoon, one Marine brigade lost over 1,000 men and never stopped attacking. June 6, 1918, northeastern France. Most of these men had never fired a weapon in combat. Farmers, factory workers, a store clerk who enlisted 3 weeks after America entered the war. The Germans who survived that first night had a name for what they faced. Teufelshunde, devil dogs. This is exactly how that name was earned. In the next 12 minutes, you'll see the 3 moments that made Belleau Wood the bloodiest and most defining day in Marine Corps history. To understand what happened at Belleau Wood, you have to understand what was happening in the spring of 1918. The German spring offensive, Operation Michael, had begun on March 21st. In 10 weeks, German forces had advanced over 50 kilometers in some sectors. That had not happened on the Western Front in 3 years. The front lines, which had been frozen since 1914, were suddenly moving. The French reserve divisions were exhausted. British units had taken catastrophic losses. Paris was 45 miles from the forward German positions. The Allied High Command was in a controlled panic. The American Expeditionary Force was not ready. General Pershing had been insisting since 1917 that American troops would not be fed piecemeal into Allied divisions as individual replacements. The United States would fight as an independent army, under American command, or not at all. This decision had strategic logic. It also had a practical cost. It meant the American military needed time to build, train, and deploy a coherent force. Time the Allies no longer had. On May 31, 1908, the 2nd Division was rushed forward to the Chateau-Thierry sector to plug a gap in the French line. The division contained 2 infantry brigades. One of them was the 4th Marine Brigade, the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments, plus the 6th Machine Gun Battalion. Most of these men had been in France for less than 3 months. As they moved forward, French units were moving through them in the opposite direction, retreating. A French officer reportedly suggested the Marines should prepare to fall back as well. The American brigade commander declined. The Marines had not come to France to fall back, and within 4 days the Germans would understand, in precise and bloody terms, exactly what that meant. Belleau Wood is not a dramatic piece of terrain. It does not dominate a ridgeline. It does not guard a river crossing. It is approximately 1 square kilometer of mature hardwood forest, beech, oak, hornbeam, growing on rocky broken ground northwest of the village of Chateau-Thierry. But it mattered in June 1918 for one specific reason. Whoever held it held the high ground overlooking the wheat fields through which any French or American advance would have to pass. The Germans understood this. They had moved into the wood in late May and spent 2 weeks preparing their defenses. The terrain inside the wood was designed, almost by accident, to favor defense. The trees grew close together. The forest floor was fractured with limestone boulders, fallen logs, and thick underbrush. Visibility rarely exceeded 50 meters in daytime. At night, it dropped to 10 or 15. A man advancing through this terrain could not maintain formation. He could not see his squad leader. He could not maneuver around obstacles without losing contact with the men beside him. The Germans had worked with this terrain, not against it. Machine gun teams were positioned in interlocking fields of fire, each covering the approach to the others. Riflemen occupied shell craters and natural depressions between the gun positions. A network of communication trenches allowed defenders to shift forces rapidly, while any attacker had to stumble through undergrowth under fire. The center of the wood was cut by a ravine running roughly north to south, approximately 40 meters wide, choked with brush and fallen trees. Any assault into the wood had to either cross this ravine or bypass it entirely. Both options exposed attackers to enfilade fire from multiple positions simultaneously. The American maps of Belleau Wood were inaccurate. The aerial photographs available showed only tree canopy. Company commanders could not see their objectives from their start lines. They could not identify machine gun positions until their men were already taking casualties. The Germans defending Belleau Wood were not elite troops. They were primarily from the 461st Imperial German Infantry Regiment, 237th Division. Most had been on the Western Front for years. They had fought at Verdun. They had repulsed French and British attacks. They did not expect serious trouble from Americans. German intelligence assessment in early June 1918 rated American divisions as inexperienced and poorly led. They were not entirely wrong, but they were about to be corrected in the most expensive possible way. The 4th Marine Brigade had been trained differently from most American infantry. Marine Corps doctrine placed extraordinary emphasis on rifle marksmanship. Every Marine was expected to qualify at ranges out to 500 yards. In 1918, this was unusual. Most armies had accepted that the machine gun and the artillery piece had made long-range individual rifle fire largely irrelevant. The Marines had not accepted this. They trained as riflemen first and soldiers second. They carried the Mon 903 Springfield D, a bolt-action rifle of exceptional accuracy. They knew how to use it. This training would prove genuinely useful in the wheat fields before Belleau Wood. Inside the forest itself, it would become almost irrelevant. Marine training also heavily emphasized the bayonet. Close-quarters combat drills were conducted repeatedly. Men were trained to thrust, withdraw, and move to the next target. They were trained that hesitation in close combat was fatal. This training was far more applicable to what was coming than anyone in the Marine Corps had anticipated when they designed it. There was another factor, cultural, not institutional. The regiments contained a core of experienced NCOs and officers who had served in small-scale actions in Haiti, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. These men had seen close combat in jungle and urban terrain. They knew what it meant to fight at ranges where firearms become secondary to whatever is in your hand. They did not know what it looked like against German machine guns in a European forest, but they understood the underlying mechanics. Move fast, stay low, close the distance, do not stop. What the Marines did not have was experience with the specific problems of the Western Front. They did not know how to adjust artillery onto targets inside a forest where forward observers could not see. They did not have a systematic doctrine for clearing prepared defensive positions in dense terrain. They were going to learn both things the hard way. They would pay for that education in a currency the Marine Corps would be spending for weeks. What made the difference, what made Belleau Wood something other than a catastrophic defeat, was something that cannot be taught in any training program. The Marines, as a unit and as individuals, did not stop when they should have stopped. This is not sentimentality. It is a tactical observation, and understanding why they kept going requires understanding what happened on the afternoon of June 6th. The plan for June 6th was straightforward, which is another way of saying it was inadequate for what the Marines were about to face. The 2nd Division would attack German positions across the entire sector. The Marines would advance across open wheat fields toward Belleau Wood and the village of Bouresches. The attack would begin at 3:45 in the afternoon, preceded by a brief artillery preparation. The artillery preparation was inadequate. American artillery doctrine was still developing. Forward observers had difficulty identifying targets inside the wood. German machine gun positions were largely untouched when the barrage lifted and the Marines stepped off. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines advanced in waves across the wheat fields south and southwest of Belleau Wood. They were advancing in the open warfare formations, Pershing's doctrine prescribed, designed for pursuit and exploitation, not for crossing ground swept by interlocking machine gun fire. The formations were too dense. The men were too close together. German machine guns opened fire at ranges between 400 and 800 meters. The Marines were still crossing open ground. They could not see the gun positions. They could not return effective fire. Men began falling in the wheat. The casualties in the first 15 minutes were severe. Companies that began the advance with 200 men lost 30, 40, 50 men before they reached the wood line. Some platoons lost every officer and senior NCO before the first tree. Junior NCOs and privates took over. The advance continued. This is the detail that German commanders could not account for. French units attacking the same positions days earlier had gone to ground under machine gun fire and waited for artillery support. That was rational. That was the correct tactical response to machine gun fire in the open. The Marines did not do it. When men were hit, the others continued forward. When officers fell, sergeants took over. When sergeants fell, corporals took over. The attack did not stop. A Marine lieutenant with the 49th Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines later wrote to his family about the advance across the wheat field. He described watching men fall around him. His company lost its captain and 2 platoon leaders in the first 5 minutes. He took command of what remained. By the time his men reached the wood line, he had 60 men left from a company of 196. They kept going. The 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, reached the southern edge of Belleau Wood by early evening. They had crossed 400 meters of open ground under continuous fire. Over 100 men were dead or wounded before the 1st Marine entered the tree line. Inside the wood, everything changed. The moment Marines entered Belleau Wood, the war they had trained for ceased to exist. Visibility dropped to 20 or 30 meters. German positions were invisible until Marines were nearly on top of them. Machine guns fired from positions 10 meters away. Riflemen appeared from behind trees and limestone boulders. There was no room to maneuver. There was no room to deploy in any formation. Squads became separated. Individual Marines found themselves alone or in groups of 3 or 4 men, moving through underbrush toward the sound of gunfire. The fighting that developed inside Belleau Wood was not clean. Men were shot at ranges where they could see each other's faces. Grenades were thrown into foxholes. Marines used their rifles as clubs when there was no room to reload and no time to work the bolt. They used bayonets. They used entrenching tools, the short-handled shovels every soldier carried, sharpened and swung as hatchets in the confined geometry of the forest floor. German soldiers did the same. This is not unusual in close combat. What was unusual was the scale and the persistence. The standard American grenade was the Mark I fragmentation grenade with a 4 to 7 second fuse delay. The delay was inconsistent. Some grenades detonated early. Some failed entirely. Marines learned to count the delay and throw accordingly. This is imprecise. Men were killed by their own grenades. The Germans used the stick grenade, Model 24, more reliable, with the stick providing leverage for longer throws. German defenders could throw grenades from covered positions without exposing themselves to rifle fire. Marines adapted by closing the distance before Germans could throw. This led directly to more bayonet fighting. Marine training had been emphasizing aggressive bayonet charges for years. Inside Belleau Wood, that training suddenly had tactical application no instructor had intended. The Winchester Model 1897 pump-action shotgun appears in this story for the same reason it appears in every story about American trench fighting. Marines carried these weapons, issued to select NCOs in each company for close-quarter clearing. The shotgun fires 5 rounds of double-aught buckshot in rapid succession. Each shell contains 9 pellets. At ranges under 20 meters, the effect on a human body is not something that field medicine in 1918 could meaningfully address. The psychological impact on German troops who witnessed shotgun casualties was significant and documented. A captured German letter dated June 15, 1918, described an encounter with American troops using shotguns. The writer stated that 2 men in his squad were killed by a single American soldier who fired repeatedly at close range. He described the weapon as barbaric. He believed it should be prohibited. Germany would file a formal diplomatic protest against the shotgun in July 1918, invoking the Hague Convention prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. The American government's response was measured in its language and absolute in its meaning. The shotgun is a legitimate military weapon, and its use is no more inhumane than the flamethrowers German forces use as a matter of standard doctrine. The protest was rejected. The shotgun stayed. The trench knife is a less famous chapter of the same story. The Mohn 1917 trench knife, the first American attempt, was a triangular stiletto blade on a cast-iron knuckle-duster grip. In theory, sound. In practice, the junction between blade and handle had insufficient strength for sustained close combat, and the hilts broke. Men whose Mohn 1917s shattered improvised from whatever was available. The Ordnance Department's answer was the Mohn 1918 Mark I, a brass knuckle-duster grip reinforced throughout, a double-edged blade, and a pommel designed specifically to function as a skull crusher when the blade was not what the moment required. The purpose of every element of its design was immediately apparent to anyone who held it. The Marines at Belleau Wood carried both versions. German defensive doctrine in 1918 was built on a specific assumption, attacking infantry breaks after suffering 25 to 30% casualties. This was a reasonable assumption. It was based on years of experience. French, British, and German units all tended to falter or withdraw after crossing this threshold. Marine units at Belleau Wood continued attacking after 50, 60, 70% casualties. From the German perspective, this behavior was irrational. It suggested either that American commanders did not care about losses, or that American troops were too inexperienced to understand when an attack had failed. Neither explanation was correct. Marine commanders were receiving reports and understood the scale of losses. The decision to continue reflected both American doctrine, which emphasized offensive action, and specific orders from division headquarters demanding results. But the Marines themselves continued for a different reason. Unit cohesion remained intact despite casualties because NCOs maintained discipline and because the Marines had been conditioned to view withdrawal as unacceptable. A Marine sergeant from the 43rd Company wrote on June 14 that he had watched a man take a bullet in the arm and continue firing one-handed until he was shot again in the leg, at which point the man used his rifle as a crutch to continue moving forward until he collapsed. The sergeant noted that this behavior was common, not exceptional. This is not the same thing as bravery in the abstract sense. It is the product of specific institutional conditioning applied under extreme pressure. The Marines advanced because they had been trained to advance and because the men around them were still advancing. There is also the cultural dimension that storm off steel, and any honest account of American combat performance in WW1 cannot avoid. A significant portion of the Marines at Belleau Wood came from rural backgrounds. Farmers, hunters, men who had handled firearms since childhood as tools of daily life rather than as products of military training imposed from above. The marksmanship emphasis of Marine Corps training landed differently in men who had already spent years shooting at moving targets in difficult terrain. Physical confidence with a weapon at close range is not something that can be manufactured in a training camp in 12 weeks. Some of these men already had it. The Germans noticed. A captured German letter describes American attacks as insane because they continued despite heavy casualties. The letter writer meant this literally. He could not find a rational explanation for what he was seeing. He did not understand that from the Marines' perspective, the calculus was different. You did not stop. You kept moving. The men around you were still moving. You kept going. What this looks like in practice is documented in the citation for Gunnery Sergeant Ernest Jansen, who would receive the Medal of Honor for actions on June 6, 1918. Jansen's company was attacking Hill 142 northwest of Belleau Wood as part of the broader June 6 assault. As his platoon advanced, 2 German machine gun crews took up positions directly in their path. The guns opened fire. Men went down. The advance was about to stall. Jansen did not wait for orders. He moved to the right flank of the German position, out of the machine gun's field of fire. He closed to within a few meters. He attacked both crews with his bayonet. He killed 12 German soldiers and forced the remaining members of both gun crews to flee the position. He was one man. The citation notes that Jansen's action allowed his company to continue the advance. It does not note, because citations do not note such things, how long it took him to close that distance, what those final few meters felt like with 2 machine guns firing, or what exactly killing 12 men with a bayonet at close range requires of a human being. The citation says what happened. The mechanics are left to the imagination. What matters is that after Jansen's action, his company's advance continued. They took Hill 142. They paid for it in blood, but they took it. And this pattern, one man, one decision, one action enabling the larger advance, repeats itself throughout the 6 weeks of Belleau Wood. 9. The fighting did not end on June 6th. It had only begun. Through the 2nd and 3rd weeks of June, the Marines fought the same battle repeatedly, on slightly different ground. The 1st Battalion, 6th Marines attacked into the central ravine on June 9th. The battalion became disoriented almost immediately in the pre-dawn darkness. Companies lost contact with each other. Platoons became separated from their companies. When dawn broke, elements of the battalion found themselves scattered across the central section of the wood, engaged in firefights with no communication with higher headquarters. They did not know if they were advancing or defending. They fought whatever enemy they could see. A Marine corporal from the 75th Company described June 9th in his diary. He had been advancing with 7 men to thick underbrush when they stumbled onto a German foxhole. The Germans fired first. 2 Marines went down. The corporal threw a grenade into the foxhole. He described the explosion as followed by screaming. He moved forward and found 3 dead Germans. He continued his entry with an account of the rest of the afternoon. By June 13, 1 week into the battle, the 4th Marine Brigade had suffered over 1,500 casualties. Some companies were at 20% strength. The 6th Marine Regiment was combat ineffective as a coherent unit. Individual battalions and companies were still fighting, but coordination above platoon level was difficult to maintain. The Germans, facing this attrition, made a decision that would prove costly. They reinforced Belleau Wood. Elements of the 87th Division were moved into the northern section of the wood on June 13th and 14th. Fresh machine gun teams were brought forward. Defenses were strengthened. This was not a tactically sound decision. Belleau Wood had limited tactical value. Abandoning it would have cost the Germans little. Holding it against Marines who had already demonstrated they would absorb 50% casualties and keep attacking was a decision that would only produce more German dead. German command made it anyway. Belleau Wood had become a test case. If experienced defenders could not stop American attacks through sheer aggression and disregard for casualties, it would establish a precedent that terrified them. On June 23rd, after a 14-hour artillery bombardment, more effective than any previous preparation, the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines launched the assault that would break organized German resistance. The attack was methodical in a way the June 6th assault had not been. Companies advanced by bounds. One platoon provided covering fire while another moved forward. When the advancing platoon was pinned, they reversed. Each German machine gun position was reduced individually, grenades thrown to suppress, rifle fire from one angle, a flanking rush from another. Progress was measured in tens of meters. Each advance cost casualties, but the advances continued. By the afternoon of June 25th, organized German resistance in Belleau Wood was collapsing. Small pockets continued fighting, but they were isolated, unable to coordinate, unable to receive supplies or reinforcements. On June 26, 1918, at approximately 9:00 in the morning, elements of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines reached the northern edge of Belleau Wood. They established positions along the tree line. German forces beyond the wood withdrew under fire. At 7:00 in the evening, the 3rd Battalion sent a message to brigade headquarters. It read, "Woods now U.S. Marine Corps entirely." The message was not entirely accurate. Small pockets of German resistance remained inside the wood. Patrols would continue clearing them through the following day. But organized German defense of Belleau Wood had ended. The remaining Germans withdrew or surrendered during the night of June 26 into June 27th. The cost was tabulated over the following weeks. The 4th Marine Brigade had suffered 1,062 killed and 3,615 wounded during the month of June. The majority of these casualties came from Belleau Wood. The figures represent over 50% of the brigade's total strength. Some battalions had suffered 70% casualties. The 3rd Battalion had suffered 70% casualties. The 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines, which had made the first assault on June 6, lost approximately 80% of its officers and 65% of its enlisted men. German losses in the Belleau Wood sector for the same period are estimated at approximately 1,600 killed, wounded, and missing, a lower figure, which is expected when experienced defenders hold prepared positions against attacking infantry. What was not expected was that the attacking infantry would take those positions at all. Over 300 German soldiers were captured. Several post-war German accounts describe American prisoners taken by German units as demoralized and confused. Prisoners taken by Marines described their captors as relieved to be out of the fighting. The German morale inside Belleau Wood had been deteriorating since mid-June, when it became clear the Americans were not going to break. The French officially renamed the position Bois de la Brigade de Marine, the Wood of the Marine Brigade. It remains that name today. The official record closes neatly on June 26, 1918. The wood is taken. The message is sent. The numbers are counted. The men are not mentioned again. The Marine private who crawled back to American lines on the night of June 10th with 2 other wounded men, the man who spent 3 hours behind a log, 20 meters from Germans he could hear but not see, wrote later that one of the men died during the crawl back. He did not know the man's name. He had arrived as a replacement 3 days earlier. The replacement private who joined the 18th Company on June 14th, assigned to a squad of 5 men led by a corporal who had been a private 4 days before, was wounded on June 16th. He does not appear in the official records after that date. The corporal who wrote in his diary about stumbling onto the German foxhole on June 9th, the grenade, the screaming, the 3 dead Germans, recorded the incident factually and moved on to describe the rest of the afternoon. He does not appear to have returned to it. The German officer whose formal diplomatic protest against the Winchester Model 1897 shotgun was filed in July 1918, the protest describing the weapon as barbaric, as a violation of civilized warfare, commanded troops who used flamethrowers as standard doctrine. The protest was rejected. The shotguns stayed. The Marines who came home from Belleau Wood came home to a country that understood the battle as a victory and understood the word Teufelshunde as a nickname to be proud of. Most of them did not correct this understanding. They came home to parades and to silence in equal measure. The parades were louder. The silence lasted longer. The wood itself still stands. The limestone boulders are still there. The ground is still broken and rocky. On quiet days, the terrain looks exactly as it looked in early June 1918, trees growing close together, visibility limited, no clear lanes of fire. A man advancing through this terrain cannot maintain formation. He cannot see his squad leader. He cannot maneuver around obstacles without losing contact with the men beside him. The machine guns are gone. The men are gone. What remains is the ground they crossed, and the record of what it cost to cross it. The Marines went in on June 6th. They came out on June 26th. They came out on June 26th. 1,100 of them did not come out at all. Wood's now U.S. Marine Corps entirely.